working collaboratively to achieve gender parity in U.S. politics. So what we've been talking about up here as we waited for the session to get started, women are the majority of the population in this country, but the vast minority of people holding elected office. Today, there are only 150 women in Congress, or 28% of Congress. BIPOC women are significantly underrepresented. So there are currently no black women in the US Senate. No black woman has ever been elected governor in any state, despite the fact that highly qualified women, like our panelist Jennifer Carroll Foy and Stacey Abrams, have waged competitive campaigns. And at the state level, only one state, Nevada, has had a women majority legislature. On the other end of the scale, we have states like Mississippi and Tennessee, where women hold 14% of seats, and West Virginia, where it's less than 12%. So I'm so honored today to be on a panel, or to be moderating this panel of incredible leaders who are, through their individual leadership and through their organizations, trying to make progress towards gender equity in elected office. I am here representing the Ascend Fund, which is a collaborative fund powered by Panorama Global that is dedicated towards accelerating the path towards gender equity in elected office. My name is Jennifer Cho. I'm the Vice President of Partnerships. I really am eager for you all to hear from our panelists, and I think you're going to be hearing themes that have already been raised today, and then I hope a lot of realness, because I've been hearing that as well. So I'm going to have our panel introduce themselves, and then we'll dive into the conversation.
Good afternoon. I am Yvette Alexander. I'm from Washington, D.C., and I'm a former elected official in Washington, D.C. As you all know, we're not a state yet. We're striving to be the 51st state. So I am considered a former council member, though we share the role of every other state's legislative body. We make the laws in the District of Columbia. I'm a proud board member of the Ascend Fund, because I think it's very important for us to support women to run for office, to hold office. So I'm eager to engage in this conversation, how we can support each other. It takes money to run, it takes money to win, and we are so pleased to have so many organizations that encourage women to run and that fund the efforts to obtain gender equity in politics. So it's a pleasure. Welcome to Washington, D.C., your nation's capital.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Jennifer Carroll Foy, and I was a delegate in Virginia. I ran for office in 2017 while pregnant with twins, because I don't do anything easy. I actually gave birth right before my election, and my election happened while I was on bed rest. So I was in the hospital with my campaign team, doing call time, planning all the things while literally laying down upside down to try to keep my babies in longer. They were born at 22 weeks. They are miracle babies. I went on to the General Assembly and passed legislation to end pregnancy discrimination, make breast milk covered by Medicaid, reduce the Black maternal mortality rate by making doulas covered by Medicaid. And you can tell what happens from the legislation that's proposed when you have women in office. And so now I'm running, I did run for governor previously in 2021 and came in second in the primary, and now I'm running for state senate in the newly drawn 33rd district, and just made it out of my primary, and I'm excited to be here. And I was also the patron of the Equal Rights Amendment, making Virginia the 38th and final state needed to enshrine women's equality into the United States Constitution.
I don't know how I can follow up with that. Hello everyone, my name is Vasundhara Kamath. I am the Director of Learning and Development at an organization called Running Start. Running Start is a non-partisan non-profit, and we train young women to run for student government and for public office. So our idea is that we start them young, get them interested in student government, give them the confidence, capabilities, and the connections that they need to go on and run for office in the future. And my role there is I wear kind of two hats. I manage a lot of the data because we believe that that is really important to see what success we've had, what our young women need. And I also work on the development side with fundraising, translating that data and communicating with our different stakeholders about what the young women's needs are and how we can grow as an organization. So glad to be here. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. My name is Sarah Pope. My pronouns are she and they, and I am Director of U.S. Programs at LGBTQ+ Victory Institute. So I work very closely with organizations like Running Start to make sure that we are building reflective governments. So Victory Institute really believes that representation is power, that representation means a reflective democracy. So we have a variety of programming, research, and convenings, and other various activities in line with that that really focus on aiding and training LGBTQ folks with getting into elected and appointed office. So excited to have this conversation today and talk about LGBTQ women in particular.
Thanks so much to our panelists. So the ambitious goal that frames our question that's on the table to start, what will it take to achieve gender parity in politics? And why is this something we should be striving for? Lots of elements to it, some of which Jennifer alluded to. So Sarah, I'd like to start with you. Victory Institute just published a new report on the motivations, experiences, and challenges for LGBTQ+ candidates. Can you speak to some of the systemic barriers that are going to need to be addressed to be able to have a truly reflective democracy?
Yeah, I really appreciate that question, just knowing that that's what our organization really focuses on, that we want democracy to be reflective, and that means so many different identities are present. Really, our democracy won't be reflective until the folks in elective office, reflect the number of variety of different marginalized identities that exist within the U.S. And so for LGBTQ+ folks, that means we need to elect 36,000 more people across all levels of government to have a true reflective democracy and representation of LGBTQ folks. So all the way down to mosquito commissioner in Florida, all the way up to ideally president someday, we'll have some sort of LGBTQ+ representation. But as noted, there are systemic barriers. We just published a report called When We Run that looked at what do LGBTQ folks really identify when they're candidates as the motivators, as the barriers, and received close to 500 responses, because right now we have about slightly over 1,000 LGBTQ+ folks in elected government, so very far from that 36,000 number. And that really comes down to a lot of barriers that are identity-based. The first being that a lot of folks receive anti-LGBTQ+ attacks. In this data, 7 out of 10 folks that were surveyed shared with us that they received some form of an anti-LGBTQ attack. So that could be in the media, social media, from their opponent, a variety of different methods of receiving those attacks, some physical, some more verbal, but they did receive some sort of identity-based attack, with 1 out of 10 receiving at least 1 attack per week. And so for us, we really highlighted that as something that's clearly very universal for the LGBTQ+ candidate, particularly those that hold multiple marginalized identities, that they, of course, receive more of the brunt of these attacks. And then in addition to that, there's then not a lot of party support. A lot of folks mentioned to us that when they went to their party and said, I'm ready to step up, I'm ready to run, folks in their party said to them, maybe you're not the most electable, you're maybe too risky of a candidate. And so for that, they had to look to other folks for support. So they looked to organizations like Victory Institute for training to make sure that they had the tools to set up a campaign plan. They looked to our sister organization, LGBTQ+ Victory Fund, so that they would have someone to endorse them and say, hey, this person actually is viable. They have a really strong campaign plan. And so those two in combination clearly can make someone feel a little bit defeated. So a lot of LGBTQ+ folks who are running for office said that they had a lot of mental health impacts from this process. They really felt like their qualifications were being questioned. So even if they were the most qualified candidate, particularly those that hold more marginalized identities like trans folks, gender nonconforming folks, LGBTQ+ folks of color, they really, again, experienced a lot of folks saying, are you really qualified? And that was coming from not just within, or not just from opponents from the other party, but within the party. So Democrats questioning Democrats who were LGBTQ+, Republicans questioning Republicans who were LGBTQ+, and again, not getting that party support to back them up. So really it comes down to making sure that we have more supports for candidates, that are more marginalized, and particularly those that are, doubly, triply marginalized in other ways and how they come together in their intersections.
Thank you so much. Sarah, as you're talking about the report and the experiences that you've documented, you're highlighting some of the ways that I really think about politics and governing and policy and getting people elected to office is so incredibly intersectional to almost any issue that you can think of that impacts women. Yvette and Jennifer and I were just talking about the fact that it is, as somebody in office, you bring a lot of things into the office with you, and you are also trying to find ways to represent communities. The Ascend Fund, we talk about the fact that we are working to elect more women, not just because it's fair, but because it's smart. The ability to be representative, I think, is critically important, but also to be a woman in elected office. We just talked about how challenging it is and where you get your support, both you and Jennifer. So Yvette, could you talk a little bit about the difference that women make when they are in elected office? Do you feel like women govern differently, and are there different issues that get prioritized?
Yeah, and I can use some most recent examples in the District of Columbia, because women's issues, and not to say that men do not support women's issues, because some men who are elected do support those issues, but women have firsthand experience with these issues. There's a council member, Christina Henderson, who, thank God, she chairs our health committee in the District of Columbia, because there's so many women's issues that are just so important and on the front lines within healthcare. She just recently passed in the District of Columbia that in vitro fertilization is actually, infertility is a diagnosis, and it will be covered now by insurance companies in the District of Columbia, and that's major. She was going through that personally, and she saw the need and the expense that it is for women to do that. And I don't really think a man may have thought about that issue as intimately as she did. Another example for women who represent in politics, in the political realm. There was a first on our dais that one of our council members just recently had a baby, and she actually breastfed her child, because she was breastfeeding and we were in session, and she had her baby on the dais, which was a first, and she breastfed on the dais when she had her newborn. And she felt the importance, because she did that actually because there were no government buildings, including our city hall, that had a breastfeeding room. And she was like, I'm not gonna breastfeed her in the bathroom. That's just, not the thing to do. So then she introduced law that every government building in the District of Columbia has a breastfeeding room, a family room for mothers to breastfeed. So it's things like that that when women run and women hold office, they think about these things that women really need. It was interesting, though, that we really have come a long way for women in office, but we still have not achieved that equity in office. And it was surprising to me personally, and Jennifer, I don't know if this was your case as well, there were more men who actually supported my efforts in running than women did. And we were saying, I don't know if it's the mean girl syndrome, if it's like we still don't think of ourselves in positions of leadership, or is it that men think that they can take advantage or that they can manipulate women in office to go the ways that they want them to go. I don't know what it was, but it's just interesting to me that women need to support women. We empower each other. We know intimately what issues that we share. We can move those issues forward. So we really have to get out of that mindset that women are not equipped to lead, that who would have thought, someone pregnant, expecting twins, we may think, oh my God, you can't run, you can't go door to door, you can't campaign in that position, you're in a motherly way, or who's going to raise your children when you hold office is so demanding. But men have children and they run for office and they hold office. So women with children, what's the difference? You know, their man can support them, or their fathers, or daycare, or what have you. Or we can bring our children to work, you know, or daycare may be an issue then. So we may need daycare. So we look at these issues that is so important for us that it's way too far in this time, in this day and time, that we don't have any female governor, that we don't have any female senators, black female senators for that matter, that we don't have more women in Senate. We don't have more women as governors leading our country. We don't have a woman who is president of the United States at this point. We have come a long way, but we still have a long way to go. And, you know, we have to work on that. But we have to encourage. I would like to take a poll for how many people in this room have supported a female candidate for office. Okay, how many have given money to a female candidate in office? Awesome. I think every hand is raised. So let's just bring a friend, and we need to fill this room and have all of those hands raised for women in office, because when women lead, women win. And that's just point blank. We are more for issues that pertain to women than men are. Men's interests are, but there's one thing about women. When women hold office, we want to do more in terms of, you know, change and making a difference. And I think that's a good thing. We take things personally when we run. It's more than just a position. We really want to make a difference with what's going on now. We really want to make a difference. So we need to continue to support women to make those differences that impact us.
Amen. Jennifer, as somebody who is currently running and has previously served in office, and who had to break through all kinds of systemic barriers in doing so, is what Yvette has been saying, does that track with your experience as well? And how do you lead as a woman, but on issues that maybe don't necessarily have a specific gender, like climate change, for example, I know is something that you've worked on?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things I remember Vice President Kamala Harris has said, she said, economic issues are women's issues. Environmental issues are women's issues. National defense are women issues, right? Because there's an intersectionality there that it impacts us, because we lead families, we lead communities, we lead commonwealths, we lead the country. I mean, we are the majority of people who are getting educated in higher education institutions. We are moving forward in a way that we're bringing entire communities along. When we say get out the vote, what we're really doing is talking to the women of the family and saying, can you get your husband, your brother, your sons, your daughter, everybody to the polls? And that's who we're really talking about. And so I always say, if you want something done right, you want something done well, have a woman do it. And this is no different. So when we're talking about this, we have to also talk about the underlying facts. The statistics show that women, we act more diplomatically. We are better at bringing people together. We are more efficient and we are more effective. And that's a fact. Those are the facts. And you can attribute it to a number of things. Even in my personal experience, I am preparing lunches for my 6-year-olds and preparing launches for GOTV, because voting starts on September 22nd in Virginia, right? All of these things are happening at the same time, but I'm also passing policies to create thousands of diverse, high-paying jobs, while also making sure that veterans don't have their retirement pay tax. We're able to get it done and do it all. What the challenge is that we're trying to convince people that we are worthy. We are worthy of being in this room. We are worthy of being listened to. We are worthy of your donations. We are worthy of you knocking doors. We are worthy. And I can tell you that's the most frustrating thing. Having people, even when I was running for governor, say, I think you should wait your time and your turn. You're a bit inexperienced. And having to remind them that I have more elected and legislative experience than 2 out of our last 4 governors. White, cis, male governors. So let's have a conversation about that. But again, it's this resistance and this hesitation, because when people see women running for office, we are oftentimes the exception and not the rule. And the way that we change that is by getting behind one another. And that's exactly what we were just talking about, was this mean girl syndrome. It doesn't stop in high school. Oftentimes, when I'm in rooms and I'm the only person that look like me, right? I oftentimes have males come to me and want to start a conversation. Oftentimes when I'm in rooms full of women, they'll direct their time and attention to the male candidates. And you have to ask yourself why, right? And there were some statistics that were done, some polls that were done saying that even on your nightly newscast, women polled that they would rather see a white male giving them the news. They're more receptive to it, because they're authority figure, they're the status quo, they're what they're used to, than it coming from a woman. And so there's some underlying layers there, some unpacking that we need to do as women, as to why we don't feel comfortable knowing that if you win, I win. It is my job to make sure that you succeed, to open doors, to make sure that even if I'm the first, I'm not the last. And how do I make this road easier, better, safer for you and your daughters and everyone coming behind me? But unfortunately, that's not how it goes. So we do have some things that we have to work amongst ourselves fundamentally as women, because I'm not going to lay this all at men's feet. But we also have to continue to do the hard work of pushing each other and making sure we get there, so therefore we don't have to continue to have these conversations. Because I can tell you that women, we're not about the lip service, we're about community service, right? So when you know that and you know how great we are, why not get behind them? Why not push a little more? I got so frustrated hearing conversations about Michelle Obama's arms, hearing conversations about Kamala Harris such and such. And these were conversations coming from women, y'all. We just have to do better. And when you're in those conversations and you're in those rooms, address it. Ask some questions. Why do you feel that way? Michelle Obama is talking about changing the way that we feed our children nutritious meals. Why does her arms offend you? Why is it a discussion point? Because then you'll start uncovering and unraveling those biases that we have amongst or about each other. Because the best thing to do to win any war is separate and divide. And if you can keep us from galvanizing, from focusing, from supporting, from doing all the things that need to be done, then they win. They win every single time.
I was going to ask if you wanted to, both Sarah and Vasundhara, I think the data, what Jennifer is pointing to is actual data that exists that demonstrates how women lead differently, but there's a huge barrier in normalizing leadership by LGBTQ plus communities by women. So wanted to give both of you an opportunity to speak as well.
Yeah, so I just wanted to add some data to whatever you were just mentioning, that the United Nations Development Program, the UNDP, released their Social Norms Index earlier this year. And this is not just for the US, for the entire world. And that said that 9 out of 10 people have a bias against women. Now note that it's not 9 out of 10 men, it is 9 out of 10 people. So you're totally right that we have to change these perceptions of what it means to be a woman, what it means to be a woman in office, because that same report also said that more than half of the people surveyed across the world believed that a man was better suited for a political position than a woman, which means that we have a whole different set of expectations when it comes to women. And if we are not doing enough to shatter those perceptions, then we are really putting an additional burden on the women who are choosing to go down that path. And we are setting them up for a whole lot of things that the traditional candidate, the stereotypical cis white male, as you mentioned, may not have to go through. So there's a lot that we need to do in terms of perception as well. It's the UNDP's Social Norms Index.
Yeah, I don't know if I have too much to add since both of you really tapped into a lot of the research that we've seen as well. But one of the kind of programs that we have at Victory Institute of course, we cannot dismantle these massive systemic barriers. We can do our little part, to chip away. But we have a program called Women Out to Win, where we work with a cohort of 5 out LGBTQ plus women who have already had some sort of campaign training, have said they're ready to drop their name in the ring, they're thinking about going into this process, but they need that extra push. And so we match them with mentors who are also out LGBTQ women that have held elected office and really try to continue to build up this encouragement because there are so many forces that are working against folks. It can come from within our own communities. We've had bisexual women who have been attacked by people saying, oh, you're not queer enough because you're in a relationship with a man, you're not really a part of this community, so we're not going to vote for you. And so that's a lot of lesbian women, a lot of gay men that might buy into that idea as well. So it kind of adds this additional barrier that folks have to get through. And it's tough because, we all are doing our part, but there's such massive barriers and roadblocks that we have to help folks figure out how to navigate. And it's something that I tell them at the end of the day, you're not gonna win everybody. What really matters is finding ways to stay genuine to who you are while sharing your qualifications as best as you can, because research has shown, if you are a woman candidate and you talk too much about your qualifications, all of a sudden you're bragging. If you don't talk enough about your qualifications, now you are not ready to be in office, even if you've held more elected positions than men, even if you've done X, Y, and Z, they'll find a way to say you're just a mom. We did a research report just on LGBTQ plus women and also the motivations and barriers they were experiencing. And that was something that we came up with, or just kept coming across again and again, folks saying, people always say you're just this, you're just that, even though moms are the ones that run households, can run a household, can then also go to work, can then do the after-school activities, are doing all of the emotional labor. They're showing that they're able to balance a budget. They're able to make ends meet when, they're able to do so many things simultaneously that are so applicable and so transferable to these government positions. But people just can't see that because they do have these kind of blinders on from their socialization. And so that's something we're trying to figure out. How can we best support folks and just keep trying to get feedback and keep having these conversations so we can keep finding the best interventions.
So speaking of support, I think we are all here at this event because we believe in investing in women and girls and women identifying leaders and people. And we know that there has been a history of underinvestment. We're proud at the Ascend Fund to have mobilized more than $9 million in funding to 30 organizations that are focused on helping more women start to walk down the path towards elected office. But we know that that is only a tiny drop in the bucket, and that overall in the US, only 2% of funding goes to organizations dedicated to women and girls. So I want to think a little bit about, and maybe I can spin this in a way, is what are we doing that will continue to motivate and inspire people to invest in women and girls? What are the political and social consequences of not doing so? And we've heard a little bit so far, but Vasundhara, I wanted to ask you, you touched on this a little bit, that you work with donors and thinking about funding. What has investment in Running Start enabled, and what is it that you are thinking about and talking about when you are inspiring people to give?
Yeah. And for context, I want to mention that I was brought on to the team of Running Start because of Ascend Fund support. And my main role started out as monitoring and evaluation consultant. So I was really focused on doing this survey, this long-term survey of our alums, really trying to figure out what the long-term impact of our programs has been. And those data points have been really instrumental in having those conversations with our donors and our funders and communicating with them what impact has looked like. But to answer the second part of your question, the challenge there also is that for our organization, we train young women. So our target demographic is 13 to 25-year-old women. So they are mostly in high school or college, and they are not going to immediately, think about running for office. They may run for student government. So then the question becomes, how do we really look at success? And how do we really communicate that success with our funders? And a few things we have learned is, one, we really need to focus and communicate with our funders that we cannot use traditional funding mechanisms and traditional ideas of success when what we are trying to do is disrupt the traditional systems. We cannot have systems where you think of progress as being linear because the system was not set up for the women that we are training. If you're thinking about young women from underrepresented communities, they are not going to have a linear political path. So it's a matter of convincing our donors and funders that the basic point is that you think of a young woman, this is going to be a long-term investment. You're going to be investing in the young woman. You're going to be investing in her future. She's going to be someone who enters the workforce. So you are investing in the US workforce, and then you're also investing in US democracy, not just for now, but this is going to be a long-term investment. So translating some of that and thinking about what data means, what does success mean? Because at Running Start, we always want to center our programs around participant experiences, not stereotypical expectations of politicians. So we really want to meet our alums where they are. And we know they are doing good work. When we did our survey in 2020, we learned that about 97% of our alums are change makers in their communities. So they are actively involved in civic projects, political projects. It's just that it's not, maybe they think it's not the right time for them to run for office. They have challenges of their own. We have had extensive conversations with our alums about what is the kind of support they need once they get to the real world. When they are no longer in school, when they have entered the workforce, what is the kind of support they need so that they can think about running for office. And that is the communication we are having with funders, convincing them that it's not going to be a linear path and they need to stay with us in this long term because it is worth it.
I love the idea. I was actually talking to somebody earlier today about the need to think differently and disrupt the way we think about philanthropy. But taking action in this space is not just, I want to try to think about how to spin this in a more positive way. You can do more than just philanthropy. At our organization, we talk a lot about the ways that you can use your resources, your network, and your voice. Some of the ways that we've done a survey of people in this room, some of the ways that you all have used your resources and network and voice is by making political contributions. And this lack of investment in women also translates on some level to the challenge of fundraising as a candidate. So Jennifer, maybe starting with you and Yvette, if you'd like to add, how has the fundraising element of being a candidate, how's the fundraising element being a candidate, how has that experience been for you? And are you seeing parallels between underinvestment?
Absolutely. So I was born and raised in Petersburg, Virginia. Petersburg is like 20 miles south of Richmond. At one time, we held the title as one of the most dangerous places to live. It's pretty common occurrence to go to sleep at night hearing gunshots. We had a number of our schools who weren't accredited. They threatened to have us graduate with just a certificate of completion, which was not a diploma because we couldn't have enough classroom hours because of the constant violence that was in our schools. So while Petersburg used to be a thriving, predominantly African-American community, as time went on and you had people remove investments, jobs left, despair crept in. So while it's a resilient community, it is what it is. But I say this so you understand where I come from. And the idea that folks come from legacy and money and relationships, it's something novel and new. And so I have to say that is a huge difficulty. And I would say it's up there with being a woman and being a Black woman. Is the social economic piece. It is hard. It is very difficult. When I decided to run for office, I'm a public defender, y'all. The manager at my local Walmart makes more than me. So having the conversation about how you're gonna do this when state senators only get paid $18,000 a year. So the system was built for only land-owning white men to be able to run and decide the policies, the bills and budgets that's passed that's gonna most, advance them in their agenda. So if you're looking for someone who has a family or who is working or any of those things, I mean, it's close to impossible. I've had a number of women tell me, I wanna run for office, I just can't afford to do it. And now in this climate, especially school board is the most difficult race to recruit for, because there's one school board member said, I want to do it, but the amount that I get just won't cover my funeral arrangements because of all the threats that they are receiving on a daily basis, because it's become so divisive with critical race theory and everything else, indoctrination and everything else. So when you look at it from that aspect, I couldn't be here if it wasn't for amazing donors like Carla Jurgensen, like Sonia Smith, some of these women who are out here who see the void of women voices and say this is one of the biggest challenges for dynamic, talented, competent women running for office is money. So if I can alleviate that for you, will you be willing to sacrifice your time, your family, your kids, your life for the benefit of all of us, to protect our democracy, to move veterans and women and children and disabled folks and LGBTQ plus folks forward? And you'll have some who'll say, hell no. And then you'll have some who'll say, hell yes. And so we're looking for those yeses and ways that we can alleviate the problem of finance. Because if we can address that, we can address a lot, y'all. Because campaigns cost. They do. No matter what anyone says, it comes down to the dollar. You gotta communicate, you gotta get your name ID up, you gotta pay for your team, you gotta pay for mailers, all of these things. And I wish, I could have better conversations with women I talk to or recruit, but I have a hard conversation. Can you commit 20 to 30 hours a week of call time? And if the answer is no, you can't do this. And I just wanna be totally, brutally honest with you, because you are valuable and your time is valuable. And that is a hard, difficult conversation, because that man, he's gonna write himself a check. He's gonna call 10 friends and he's gonna end up with $50,000. And that's just not the reality for many of us. The people we need to run, the people closest to the pain should be the ones in power. Because when you've gone to bed hungry, when you have been too poor to be sick, when you have had to work 40 hours and make $7.25 an hour trying to make sure your family's okay. My 2 nieces, that's my brother's testimony. That's who we need running, because you move different. It's a difference of urgency. You're hungry and you're mad as hell because poverty is a policy choice and something can be done. But again, once we fix that financial piece and we have more of these amazing donors, especially women donors who will get behind these candidates and say, if I can alleviate this, will you do all the other hard work? And they say yes, then that's how we'll be able to have more of us in office. And to this amazing fund, they've identified the problem. They say we are a solution, but we can't do it alone. And that's where all of you come in, helping and supporting and giving them the resources to get it to the candidates so we can do what we need to do to move our democracy forward.
And, there's a barrier with women. Traditionally, women, we have a problem asking for money. That was really hard for me when I first campaigned, to make those phone calls asking donors for money, because that's something that I really wasn't accustomed to doing. And men, that's like second nature for men, to ask for money. But that was the hardest barrier I had to overcome. I've gotten over that now. I can call each and every one of you and say, give me a check now. So that comes with time. But what is an interesting concept, and I can appreciate that, but we need so many organizations, that readily can get behind women and support women. But I don't know about other states, but there may be about 20 or 30 states maybe now that, some jurisdictions that have public financing. And I'm kind of a little leery, about public financing. Public financing has its pros and its cons. The pros are that, for someone who's an incumbent, this will encourage more people to run, because there's state or local funding for you to run for office. But those are your tax dollars that most states are matching. So say, for example, if I asked each of you to give me $50 the state would in turn quadruple that. So $50 then turns into $250. But those are your tax dollars that are doing that. And the problem with that is that, there's only one candidate that's going to win. But there may be 10 candidates who public financed. So the state is giving all this money up to ultimately to 9 losers and 1 winner. So, and you don't get that money back, or you don't have to give that money back. But so public financing has pros and cons. It encourages people to run. Non-traditional candidates run, but it's also tax dollars, so people are up in the air about that. So that is one avenue now that's really encouraging. And I have seen more women run due to public financing because they don't have to ask a donor for as much money as they traditionally would have to ask them for. They know the state can match those dollars. So that's one way to do it. But women really need to start, and the training efforts really help. Women need to have more confidence to make those phone calls and ask for money, to raise that money. And when we see those funders coming to women and, giving them the money to run and win, it makes a difference. So organizations definitely help to give women that equity, that running start, because men are way ahead, even in terms of the money that men make. Even if I compare my salary to my male counterparts' salary doing the same job, his money is more. So even if I took out my 401k savings to campaign or what have you, the male counterpart still has more of a base than me. It was interesting, I don't know, I'm a tennis fan, but it was so encouraging. I don't know if any of you saw the US Open, but that $3 million check that Coco Gauff won, and Novak Djokovic actually had the $3 million check too. That was a first to obtain that parity. We're all playing the same game, or they're playing the same game, they're at the same tournament, but the woman was earning half of what the man. That's a perfect example now that there is now gender equity in sports in that tournament. So can you imagine how the winners feel when they were getting half of what when the women were getting half of what the man was getting? The same crowd was there. The same ticket sales were there. The same, everything was the same except for that check at the end when you win. So when I use that example to say that the female candidates, women candidates, have to be on an even keel with the male candidates, and they're not. So that's why female run organizations or female organizations or organizations that support women to run are important, because right now there's not equity. So we don't want equality. Everyone can run for office. We want equity. So in order to achieve that equity, we have to have a level playing field. So women need to have that boost with more funding that men already have there. We have to raise the bar for women so that we can achieve that equity for women to run and have that same base of dollars to run. And also, I'm sorry, I just want to encourage women not only to run for office, but what I also had a challenge with, women engaged in politics, in the whole campaign. Women who are treasurers, women who are campaign managers, women who are fundraisers. I had a hard time finding women to do those activities. And maybe when we have more women who are actually fundraisers, more women who are actually campaign managers, more women who are field organizers, then we can achieve that parity too. Because, we still have men on the base of our campaigns. I don't know if that was true for you, but my campaign was majority, all of my campaigns were majority male-led campaigns. And I was looking hard to find a female fundraiser, a female treasurer, a female field organizer, a female campaign manager. So we need to be organized and trained all the way around for the whole political game. and we're not there yet. So it's not only the candidate. You may not want to be a politician. You may not want to hold office, but you may want to work behind the scenes. We need people behind the scenes and funding for those behind the scenes people as well.
You're speaking to somebody who's been a fundraiser for most of her career. I actually want to use that as a moment to pivot to the Ascend Fund is a collaborative fund. And when we think about collaboration, it is collaborative in that we have multiple donors who work with us to enable us to make investments with their resources. But we also hope that we are continuing to foster and create space for collaboration among the organizations we support in support of women who are generally more collaborative as legislators. Vasundhara, you mentioned earlier that the Ascend Fund had enabled Running Start to make a longer-term investment in your ability to make longer-term investments. I want to ask you, this is slightly self-serving on my part, having mentioned that I was a fundraiser. It has been our commitment to make multi-year gifts because we know that that enables, well, you tell me what that enables you to do. Why is it important?
Yeah, so again, personal story, I was really happy that the Ascend Fund decided to invest because that's how I got my job, so I'm a little biased there. And of course, we launched this data project, which really got us thinking about what I mentioned earlier, what success looks like, thinking about not just doing new programs for new participants, but also going back to the people we have already trained and thinking about what they need. And at Running Start, we are all about collaboration. We have conversations across the aisle. We train people from different political views. So we believe in collaboration as part of our mission. And the great thing that the Ascend Fund encouraged us to do was actually think about it more in terms of a pipeline. So since we train young women, we have a real opportunity to collaborate with other organizations like the Victory Institute and think about sort of transferring them to these other organizations when they believe that the time is right for them to take the next step of their political career or their political path. So the access that we have to these other organizations in turn lowers the barrier for the young women who are thinking about politics. Because again, as everyone mentioned, we cannot take away the intersectional element out of women in politics and training. So there are these great organizations that focus on specific identities, focus on specific regions, etc. So there are organizations out there that are willing and able to help these young women based on the different paths or on the different time of their life. So we are here to kind of lower that barrier for them and think about how we can collaborate with other organizations, and the Ascend Fund has been instrumental there.
Thank you. Sarah, I'm going to ask you to speak next because I think that what we hope is that by pooling collaborative resources to then fund a set of organizations and create space for collaboration, that we have removed what would typically be potentially your two organizations competing with each other for the same resources. So I'd love to hear, again, without putting pressure on you, has there been value in collaboration for you or for Victory Institute as well?
And feel free to put the pressure, just because it's in a very honest, transparent way, I can say Ascend Fund is my favorite funder to work with, and I'm not lying. I'm not.
I can't even take credit. It's my colleague who runs it.
But I'm not saying that just because I'm on this panel. I'm saying that because part of what I love about this collaboration is that we can be really honest. We have monthly convenings where we come together and talk about the challenges that all of us are experiencing. And so to kind of go on a small little tangent, when I was earning my master's degree, I was really focusing on nonprofit management and was taking a grants and fundraising course. And my professor, another woman in fundraising, but she was saying, at the end of the day, it's a competition. You might be sitting next to someone that later you're going to be competing for the same grant. And the minute I heard that, I really hated it, just because I'd always hated the idea of when women are applying for jobs, they say, oh, well, only one woman's going to get the job. You're competing against the other women instead of thinking about the entire pool, things like that. So I've really tried to challenge that my entire career, really looking at how can we build partnerships? How can we look at people as whole? Because while my organization might be able to support part of them, they don't exist in a vacuum. And so I think about a lot of the connections between like Stephanie, who's in the room. We've worked together. She is with Latinos Represent, and we've been able to collaborate and say, okay, we have these LGBTQ plus women who are Latina. We're able to really address the challenges that they experience as an LGBTQ plus person, and we do our best to not separate any of their identities by finding who are some other out LGBTQ plus Latinas that can speak to them about their own experiences. But we also want to collaborate with Stephanie, who's the expert in this space, who can say, or have a conversation with them and provide them with specific resources. Or I think Running Start is a great example where one of my favorite programs we do at Victory works with undergraduate students. So these are out undergraduate students who are trying to get in the back end of policy, getting them early in that pipeline. We pair them with a member of Congress's office, really get them invested in policy. But when it comes to finding the right folks for this cohort, we want to make sure it is reflective. We don't want it to be all white, cis, gay, young undergraduate men. We want to make sure we have a reflective program. So I can call up my friends at Running Start and say, I know you've been working with a lot of young women who are really investing in their growth. They might have been the leaders of their school governments. They might be in student government now in their undergraduate careers. 20% of Gen Z, and it continues to grow, is identifying as LGBTQ+. So of course, they've been working with folks who would fit within both of these categories, and these are people who have already had some investment, already understand how policy works, really can get a lot out of this internship, and then through this can maybe come to one of our trainings learning about being a candidate. And then I work really closely with folks at Emily's List. I meet with their fellows every quarter to talk about some of the opportunities we have for their LGBTQ+ women. And so it feels like this really great cycle where we're able to really relay and share information, talk about best practices. When you were doing your research, we talked about the research that I had done, and that was, I think, one of the first times we met, and without knowing each other, still wanted to help each other. And I think that's really telling.
Our surveys still have questions that were recommended by you, so yes.
Yeah, so I just think it's really special to be in this space. And like Jennifer mentioned, her colleague Abby has also just been a great resource where she's been in the fundraising space for so long that I've had one-on-one conversations with her saying, you know, we're having this challenge, what do you recommend? Or she'll send me another funder and say, you know, this isn't someone we work with, but I saw that they might be supporting your work. So I feel like all of us approach it in a very selfless way where we just really want to all elevate women and find the ways that we can help one another do that. And it's a really special space, so that's why I'm not lying when I say it's my favorite.
We are technically out of time, but I actually do want to, if you all will be willing to indulge, give Jennifer and Yvette a chance to, data will show that women, once elected to office, are more collaborative across the aisle with each other. Has that tracked with your experience as well?
Definitely. I just want to say overall, in closing, that diversity is needed. You don't want any political body to just be the same across the board. So I think diversity is important, whether it be LGBTQ, women, men, age, different ages, representation, different races. You need that diversity to represent a people as a whole. We need to be representative of those that we are representing. And you need those different point of views. Jen and I were talking that a lot of younger people may say, well, I can't relate to you. And I said, well, I can't really relate to you either on the other end. But what we need to do is just bring together those policies and those areas of interest that you're interested in. And here's the thing, you know, we're female politicians or women in politics, but there are other issues beyond women's issues that people that needs to be a bigger picture, that we represent more than just women's issues, but it is so important that we do know those issues intimately. But we know other issues as well, like climate change, like, you know, in healthcare, or the cost of insurance premiums, or, you know, for me soon, retirement, Social Security. I wish President Biden would lower the age to maybe 60 for that, for me to get my max. But interests that across the board that we represent. So I think in looking at candidates, and maybe we need to explain that further, that, you know, if you may be an LGBTQ candidate or a female candidate or a Black candidate, you know, African American candidate, look at us as, yes, we know those issues as well personally and who we are, but there's a bigger picture to what we represent. And I think when people understand that, maybe there will be more support across the board. Maybe people just look at women in politics and just say, well, I'm a man, you know, what can you do for me? Because you're just interested in women's issues. But we have to really, I think it's incumbent upon us to say, no, we have all the issues and women's issues under our wraps. We're not just focusing on women's issues, even though we are women candidates, women politicians. We are a broad range of representation for what you need, but we do need more women in those seats so that we can have that diverse, collaborative view in politics, and we just don't have that. And to be fair, I think women are even more diverse or more collaborative or more engaging in accepting all issues rather than men. Sometimes men are just my way or the highway or stuck on their issues, but we can look at a broad range of issues and engage people on so many levels. And that's what's so unique about women in politics. So I definitely am excited about so many organizations that are now sold on supporting women's efforts in obtaining that parity and getting more women in these seats to represent us politically. And I'd like to see the day when there is a majority of women in office and maybe a minority of male candidates. That will be great. Let's snap on that, yes. But thank you all for engaging us. And I didn't know if there were questions from the audience, but.
We are sadly out of time.
Yeah, so very briefly, I would just like to say, of course, women are better collaborators. I remember when I was elected, one of the first things I said I was going to do is I'm going to shake the hands of 3 Republicans every single day. And I want them to get to know me, right? Get to know my humanity. Get to know me as one of the first women to graduate from Virginia Military Institute, which impressed a lot of guys. Women are like, whatever. You know, get to know me that, you know, I have young kids. You know, what I do as a public defender, protecting people's constitutional rights. And I can tell you that when I passed bills, I did it with the intent of making sure I brought Republicans along. I had to tell Democrats, I need you to not sign on my bill because I need a Republican as my co-patron, right? And the majority of my bills I passed were in a bipartisan fashion because that's how we do things. We know that in our household, whether I'm negotiating with my 4-year-old or my 40-year-old husband, right? There is a collaboration that's happening. There's a negotiation, a give and pull. And we know as women that our job is to get the job done. Let me say that one more time. Our job is to get the job done. And so that's what you get when you have more amazing women in office leading, you know, policies, budgets, and budget amendments. I mean, that's just what it is. And again, I want to thank Ascend Fund for existing, for your hard work, for doing the grunt and the thankless job of vetting, because some people will say, I want to support women, but I just don't have the time to look into these women who are good candidates. Well, they'll take care of that for you, right? And so knowing that your money is going to go to something good, protecting our democracy, moving women forward, making sure we have all the things that we need to thrive, I think that's the best thing to do. And I want to thank you for doing this.
Thank you so much. Well, I will say that the Ascend Fund exists because of the women on this stage and what they represent and the work that they do. And our tagline, our North Star, which I will leave you with today, is when she ascends, we all rise. So thank you all, panelists. Thank you all for being here.